Hello everybody, I hope you're doing alright. I'm sorry that I didn't get this video out sooner. I was really busy with university and with work. I even had to give a lecture at the Natural History Museum. That was fun. So this is part 2 of the 1K subscriber special. Well, technically I could even call it the 1.5K subscriber special, but anyway. In the David Peters video, I asked you guys what you would like me to do for this special, and most of you guys simply commented topics that you would like me to talk about. And I guess I will just do that. I will go through each comment and just talk about the suggestions that were made. So the first suggestion comes from a viewer named Tarptano. Very interesting name there, sounds a bit like a Pokemon. Tarptano wants me to talk about Protoavis. So what is Protoavis? Protoavis is a kinda mysterious fossil that was found in the early 90s, I believe 1990, 1991, in the docking beds of Texas in like Triassic sediments, by a paleontologist named Sankar Chatterjee of the Texas Tech University. And this fossil was pretty notorious at the time because Chatterjee interpreted it as a genuine Triassic bird, so 60 million years older than Archaeopteryx, complete with flight adaptations in the wings, even with alleged quill knobs which have shown the presence of flight feathers and an avian cranium and everything you associate with protobirds basically. And this was of course very controversial because in the early 90s it had just become consensus among paleontologists that birds are small dinosaurs that evolved somewhere during the middle or late Jurassic. And of course, like some paleoornithologists of the old school, namely Alan Feduccia, who is, I think we need to make more jokes about his name sounding like douche because he is a douche. But anyway, like people like him immediately jumped onto this discovery to say, aha, this is proof that birds do not descend from dinosaurs, but from some earlier Triassic reptiles. Chatterjee himself, interestingly, did not endorse that view. He simply thought that birds still are within this whole Maniraptoriform family, but that family already evolved in the Triassic out of earlier dinosaurs than assumed. Like he thought that Dromaeosaurs and even Ornithomimosaurs were already running around in the Triassic and were giving rise to birds. And that view at the time was kinda being supported by the fact that Shuvosaurus was discovered, I think also in the docking beds, and at the time it was interpreted by some paleontologists, I think including Chatterjee, as a Triassic Ornithomimosaur. But that later of course turned out to be wrong. It was actually a crocodile relative that convergently evolved into this ostrich shape that we're familiar with. Yeah. Anyway, there were also some other interpretations trying to fit this anomaly into the evolution of birds. In his book, The Predatory Dinosaurs of the World, Gregory S. Paul, for example, suggested that birds may have already evolved in the Triassic, not out of Coelurosaurs, but instead out of the Herrerasaurs, because the Herrerasaurs, especially Herrerasaurus, already had some kind of bird-like characteristics, like for example the pubis was retroverted, and there were also some details of the wrist bones that were kind of bird-like. So he thought it's maybe possible that some of these already evolved like small size, arboreal habits, and maybe already feathers, and then evolved into birds. But Paul himself was basically just spitballing that idea. He was not actually supporting that idea. He just wrote that out as one possibility in case new evidence arises in the future. CM Koseman, friend of the show, he actually drew one of these speculative Herreravians. It's a nice drawing by itself, but I'm a bit disappointed by it because it doesn't really express the idea of a Herrerasaur evolving into a bird. I think that's still a bit of an untapped territory for speculative evolution. This entire idea of non-maniraptoran dinosaurs evolving into their own version of birds. I think people can do a lot with that, because in the past there have actually been many ideas like that surrounding bird origins. I wrote a whole blog post about it, about all the different ideas where birds come from. Like, some people have suggested that birds evolved out of proto-crocodiles, or that they evolved out of synapsids, or like some Triassic theropods. In like the 1870s there was even the idea that birds evolved from the ornithischians, the bird-hipped dinosaurs, because, well, they also have this retroverted pubis and they also have very similar feet. That's why they're called ornithopods. And I always thought it would be really interesting for artists to explore, what would such a non-existent missing link look like between like a Dryosaur type ornithopod and birds. Dear artists, get to work on that, please. Anyway, around the year 2000, other paleontologists, like I think Lawrence Whitmer, took a closer look at the Protoavis fossils, and they found out that it pretty much wasn't at all what Chatterjee thought it was. It turned out that this was most likely just a jumbled mess of multiple animals, like multiple Triassic reptiles that were all caught in a flash flood and mixed together and crushed and so on, like just a very bad mess of bones from very different animals. And it's now thought that like the cranial material, like the back of the skull and some of the neck vertebrae, came from a Drepanosaur, which, if you don't know, were these chameleon-like creatures that had a short boom in the Triassic, but then became extinct again. And like there are some paleoornithologists who thought that these things were bird ancestors because they did really evolve very bird-like heads, but this is just convergent evolution because the rest of the body has nothing in common with birds. So that's like one half of the Protoavis fossil, and the rest of the body probably came from some small Zoelophysid type dinosaur. So this was just a chimera that was misinterpreted by a scientist who has had, honestly, kind of a bad reputation when it comes to claims like this. Anyway, the moral of the story, Protoavis plays no role anymore today in bird evolution. But it is a really fascinating chapter of this 90s era crazy claims in paleontology. So the next suggestion comes from Snow Leppy Exists 2091. He wants me to talk about the history of Nodosaurs because he thinks it's a group that is generally overlooked by people. If you don't know what Nodosaurs are, or more precisely Nodosauridae, that's like a subgroup of the Ankylosauria. Generally speaking, like Ankylosaurids are those ankylosaurs that have a tail club that they can defend themselves with, and Nodosaurids are those that do not have a tail club, like they have a pointy tail, but instead they have like these big horns or spikes that project from their flanks. That's how you can usually detect a very bad reconstruction of Ankylosaurus if it has both a tail club and those side-facing spikes, you know, like the one in Jurassic World, because the real Ankylosaurus only had that tail club. Anyway, Nodosaurus, yeah, I guess because they do not have that tail weapon, people generally think they are just more boring, and they tend to get overlooked, which is a shame because these animals in the Cretaceous, they were quite common, they were quite large and spectacular, and some of the best dinosaur fossils that we have actually come from Nodosaurs. Like there is this amazing specimen from Alberta, Canada, of a Borealopelta, which is basically an individual that died, then was swept out to sea, and I think the salt water basically mummified it, and then that mummy fossilized, and now we have this amazing fossil where you can see almost every detail as it would probably be in the living animal too. I think there were even like some studies that were able to discern the color of the fossil, of the animal. They just get overlooked regardless, which is a bit of a shame. So what can be said about the history of Nodosaurus? But actually, now that I think about it, I don't know if Snowplexiasists asked me about like the natural history of Nodosaurus, like their evolution, or if he wants me to talk about the research history. Because about their evolution I do not know much, but from a research history standpoint they are of course very important also because a Nodosaur was one of the very first dinosaurs recognized, Hylaeosaurus. It's one of those first 3 dinosaurs that were included by Richard Owen in the definition of Dinosauria, and it's also one of those animals reconstructed at the Crystal Palace Park. And apart from that, I think Nodosaurus also played a big role in the research history of Baron Franz Nopschka, because he identified all of those like dwarf Nodosaurs, dwarf Ankylosaurs that used to live in what would today become Romania. Back then, of course, Europe was just a series of islands. And I bet like there's some Nodosaur researcher out there that can tell even more interesting stuff about these creatures. But yeah, like there is, I think as a general rule of thumb, there is no group of fossil animals that is not interesting. Like even some like Cambrian worms, like there you can find interesting stuff to talk about them. Like I even managed to make a whole blog post about brachiopods, which I've seen even many paleontologists say are extremely boring. But yeah, I don't know, like a lack of enthusiasm is a fault of the researcher and not the fault of the research subject, in my opinion. Next up, JS Naruto 2 aka Polar Bear. He wants me to just talk about any dinosaur game I want to play. So I already did an episode of the podcast with Memo where we talked about dinosaur video games and generally games we would like to exist, so I recommend checking that out. And as in dinosaur, again, I understand the question as in dinosaur games I want to play, as in a game that I have not played yet but really want to play. That's a good question actually, because what is there? I mean, there is this new Jurassic Park survival game that has been announced, but it's still being developed. I think I would like to play that because apparently it will be like you can explore all of Isla Nublar. I'm not sure if it's open world, but you will be able to go to all of the key locations from the movie as like some engine worker that was accidentally left behind during the hurricane. And yeah, that just sounds fun. It sounds literally like Jurassic Park Trespasser from the 90s, but actually fully realized. And yeah, as a recommendation, if any of you guys really want to play a game like Trespasser but in good, I cannot recommend more the Peter Jackson King Kong game from 2005. I've recently actually replayed it again on the GameCube, and it's just such a good game for, given the fact that it is a licensed game and it came out in this like 2000s jank era. It's such a good survival game and even survival horror game. Like when you get attacked by the T-Rex in the game, it's truly terrifying. Yeah. So that's a game I want to play. That's a game I loved playing. What else could I talk about? I really like playing the Jurassic World Evolution games. Generally, I love these like park building games, not just with dinosaurs, but also the zoo games like Zoo Tycoon or Planet Zoo. I don't know, it's just fun. I love games where you can create your own thing or just watch something grow, like an ant farm. They should make a remake of Sim Ant while we're at it. Sim Ant and Sim Earth and all of those old Sim games that they used to make in the 90s, in between Sim City and The Sims. But the problem is Maxis doesn't actually exist anymore. They were I think they were liquidated by EA the same way. No wait, I won't make that joke. Yeah, sad story there. And didn't the developer of the SimCity competitor, like City Skylines, aren't they also in trouble right now? I think that some fucked up shit is happening over at, was it Paradox Interactive or Take-Two? I don't know. Anyway, yeah, I mean the Jurassic, and let's conclude by saying the new Jurassic Park survival game. I think I'm looking forward to that. I recommend you all the King Kong game. Yeah, tell me in the comments what dinosaur games you like, what dinosaur games you are looking forward to. And oh god, I forgot. There's also Prehistoric Kingdom. It's on my wish list, but I haven't played it yet. I think it's still in early access. I have to check that out now that I think about it. Yeah, so Jurassic Park Survival, King Kong, and Prehistoric Kingdom. Let's all check those out together. So here is random user 12237. He suggests that I make a compilation of all my Spec Evo creatures so far, and also to do short video versions of my blog posts. So the first thing I already did for part 1 of the 1K subscriber special. Please go check that out. It was fun to make. And as for the second thing, yeah, that is actually something I thought about just reading my blog posts and making videos about that. Especially now that Edge basically tried to do that for me, but as you all know, without informing me. Yeah, the problem is if I do this, I'm just not that good at reading a script. I just sound a bit too robotic, I think. And people also don't like it when I use the funny Dagof Ur AI voice. So I don't really know what to do there. If it would, you tell me what you think. Would you really like it if I just make video versions of my blog posts about whatever topic I've written about? Kim Khan has an excellent suggestion for a topic. First, Fringe ideas that turned out to be true, and second, current Fringe ideas that I think have some merit. As for the first one, that's kind of a hard question to answer because almost all theories that later became mainstream, of course, started out as fringe theories, arguably, like Einstein's theory of relativity, Darwin and evolution, Copernicanism. All of that used to be, of course, in the minority within the scientific paradigms from which they emerged, and only later on did they gain more followers. So you could say those were all fringe ideas at some point. So it is a bit difficult to say what used to be a fringe theory in the past and now isn't In paleontology, the first thing that of course comes to my mind is like all of the ideas of the dinosaur renaissance, that dinosaurs were warm-blooded, that they evolved into birds. When those theories first came up, they were in the minority. Like mainstream paleontologists at that point did not like those theories. Some of them vehemently argued against them. It came to the point where Robert Barker had to label his own ideas as heresies. Yeah. So yeah, I guess you could say those things started out as fringe theories that later turned out to be true. Especially like the idea that some dinosaurs had feathers. That, like, there were already some speculative drawings from the 70s that showed that, but it took until like the 90s for there to be actual fossil evidence of feathered dinosaurs. Outside of paleontology, the first thing that comes to my mind is plate tectonics. Like when Alfred Wegener first proposed plate tectonics, I think in the 1920s or 40s, I'm not sure anymore, people thought he was mad because he did not actually provide, like he was correct with the idea that the continents drifted away from each other. In the hindsight, of course, but at the time his theory failed to take off because he could not propose a mechanism by which this happens. Like he literally thought that the continents scraped over the seafloor, like I don't know. But of course today we know that plate tectonics works differently than what Wegener proposed, but in general, like continental drift was, his idea of continental drift was correct. So what else is there? What other fringe theories are there that kinda turned out to be true? I think in paleoanthropology, like a lot of fringe ideas about Neanderthals kinda turned out to be true later. Like I remember when I was growing up, there was a lot of like media saying that Neanderthals were not capable of like art, of artistic thought, or other like higher skills that we associate with humans. But there was already some media that did depict like Neanderthal art or sculptures and such, and those were like just thought of as fanciful speculations at best, or just wrong at worst. But today there is plenty of evidence that Neanderthals actually did make art. It was just a bit more abstract than later human art. And also that, and they also had like ornaments and such. Anyway, the second thing that Kim Khan asked is about fringe theories that current fringe theories that I think have some merit. The first thing that comes to my mind there is Gregory S. Paul and his idea that some of the animals we traditionally think of as non-avian dinosaurs, closely related to birds, are actually within aviale, but became secondarily flightless. Like his idea is that like Velociraptor, Deinonychus and such actually descend from Archaeopteryx type dinosaurs and simply lost the ability to fly later on during the Cretaceous. And while not as extreme as he originally proposed in like the 80s or early 2000s, I do think this idea still has a lot of merit, because some of the evidence he put forward still holds up. For example, like the earliest dromaeosaurs are small climbing forms, small gliding or even flying forms like Microraptor, and only later on did dromaeosaurs produce like large forms that, like Deinonychus or Utahraptor, that converged again on like earlier theropod dinosaurs. And I think there recently even was a study that found evidence of like secondarily flightlessness in Oviraptorosaurs, but they didn't credit Paul in that paper, which was a bit shitty. But yeah, I do think there is genuinely a good possibility that all of these dinosaurs descend from like a small climbing, gliding, or maybe even flying ancestor, and birds simply kept up with those adaptations, and some dinosaurs secondarily lost flight again as soon as it evolved, because that's actually how evolution works a lot of the time. Yeah. Speaking about Gregory S. Paul, like recently, like the third edition of his Princeton Field Guide to Dinosaurs came out, and I saw a lot of vitriol about it online, which I don't know, it just rubs me the wrong way. Yeah, like Paul is a bit notorious for his own classification schemes, where he says, like he's a lumper basically, like he says, oh no, this dinosaur is actually within that or that genus. Like for example, Massospondylus is actually a species of Plateosaurus and such. Yeah, like many people disagree with him on that, but he just has a different philosophy based on how taxonomy should work. And he also has a few other ideas, like again, like I said, like the neo-flightless hypothesis, or that recently that there actually were 3 Tyrannosaurus species. And yeah, it's all not within the consensus. And I've seen people like even comparing to someone like David Peters for that, but I think that is really ridiculous. Like, because Paul actually, like, he knows how osteology works, he knows how to work with fossils, he has worked with fossils. I trust that he knows what he's talking about, even though I do not agree with many of his ideas. I don't think he should be vilified just because he goes against consensus, because consensus is not fact. Consensus changes all the time, and we do need people like Paul who have a bit of outside the box thinking, but still with like some valid evidence presented, in order to advance science, in order to think outside the box, in order to deal with some current problems. Anyway. Another thing I like to believe is that turtles actually do descend after all from parareptiles similar to the Parasaurs. Because those genetic studies, or rather molecular studies, that show turtles being either in the Lepidosauromorpha or Archosauromorpha are actually not as definitive as people like to think. B, there was a cladistic study recently that found parareptiles to actually be within Diapsida, which actually makes those studies kinda moot. And C, there was this paper from 2021 by 2 German paleontologists, where they compared the skull of Chinlechelis with that of, like, Chinlechelis was one of the oldest known turtle fossils. And yeah, and they compared it with the skull of Anthodon, which was a Permian Parasaur, and they found that these two really were similar enough to say that turtles descend from small Parasaurs. Obviously that is a minority opinion at the moment. It used to be a majority opinion in like the 90s, and then of course like all these genetic studies came out, and these supposed proto-turtles like Papochelis that allegedly showed that turtles come from like somewhere around the Lepidosauromorph family tree. But yeah, I just like to think that the old idea is still true, because it would just be cool if turtles were the last living group of this really ancient and frankly really cool reptile group. So that has been it for now. I don't know what the next video will be. What I can say is that at the same time as I'm uploading this, I am also posting a piece of creative writing on my Patreon that you all can read for free. It includes a bit of my own art, and it's a kind of like a like a written form of like one of those paleo documentaries. Maybe you like it, maybe not. Tell me what you think. See you until next time. Bye.